I was lacing up my boots when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was a Saturday morning in early March, the kind where the sky over Kingston sits low and gray and the snow has gone dirty at the edges of the road, and I had planned nothing more than a walk to the market on Princess Street and maybe a coffee before the cold drove me home. But something made me pick up. Maybe instinct. Maybe 63 years of being a mother. All I heard at first was breathing. Then my daughter's voice, very small, said, "Mom, I'm at Breakwater Park. I have the kids with me. I didn't know where else to go." I didn't ask questions. I put down my coffee, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. She was sitting on a bench near the water. The lake was still half frozen, and the wind off it was sharp enough to sting. My daughter had her arm around my granddaughter, who was 7 years old and had fallen asleep against her shoulder with her boots untied. My grandson, who had just turned 10, was standing a few feet away, throwing stones at the ice with the focused, mechanical motion of a child who has been told to occupy himself while the adults fall apart. There were 2 large suitcases and a backpack on the ground beside the bench. Not duffel bags, suitcases, the kind you pack when you are not coming back. I sat down beside her without a word. She didn't look at me right away. She stared out at the lake for a long moment, and then she said, "He fired me, and then his father told us to be out of the house by this morning." I already knew which house she meant. The house my son-in-law's family had built on a lot in Westbrook, the one his father had insisted they move into 18 months ago when my daughter had been 6 months pregnant with my granddaughter. To save money, his father had said. To keep the family together, he had said. What he had not said, what became clear only slowly, the way cold gets into a house through a crack you can't find, was that living under that roof meant living under his rules. His opinions about how my daughter dressed. His comments at dinner about what she ordered, what she spent, whether she was raising the children correctly. His habit of going silent when she spoke in family meetings and then repeating the same point as if she hadn't said it. And everyone nodding at him as though the idea had just been born. My daughter had worked in the family's logistics company, a freight and distribution firm my son-in-law's father had built over 30 years, the kind of business that isn't flashy, but moves serious money. She had started in the accounts department and worked her way into a senior coordinator role. She was good at it, better than good. I had watched her stay up past midnight going over freight contracts, watched her come home some evenings with ink on her fingers because she still liked to mark things up by hand. And then, 4 months ago, things had begun to shift. Meetings she was excluded from. Her access to certain financial files quietly removed. Her name taken off correspondence she had always been copied on. She had told me about it in pieces, over the phone, always with that particular hesitation she has when she is trying not to alarm me. I am her mother. She has been trying not to alarm me since she was 16 years old. "What did he say?" I asked. "His father. What exactly did he say when he told you to leave?" She was quiet for a moment. My grandson had stopped throwing stones and was watching us now from a short distance, the way children do when they understand the stakes without understanding the details. "He said the house was in the family name and always had been," she said. "He said the job was a family position and it needed to go to someone who—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "He said my bloodline had never really been a fit for the family, that he had tolerated it long enough." Tolerated it. I sat with that word for a moment. My daughter is a black woman. She is my child. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness and a laugh that can fill a room. The man who built that house had eaten at my table at Christmas. He had held my granddaughter the day she came home from the hospital, and he had used the word tolerated. I looked out at the lake. "Where is your husband?" I said, not with anger, just to understand. "He didn't disagree with him," she said. "He just stood there." I nodded slowly. I thought about what she must have felt in that moment, the particular quality of that silence, the way a person can betray you without making a sound. "All right," I said. "Get the kids up. We're going to my place." She looked at me then, and I saw something in her face that broke my heart, a little relief mixed with the particular shame of a capable woman who has been brought low and hates herself for needing to be helped. I reached over and squeezed her hand once, firmly. "You don't need to know the whole plan right now," I said. "You just need to be warm." What my daughter did not know, what very few people knew, was that I had not spent the last 15 years simply running a small property management office on Division Street. I had spent those years building something quiet and deliberate, the way you build anything that lasts, without fanfare, without announcements, without giving anyone the opportunity to tell you it couldn't be done. I had started with one rental property after her father died, a duplex on Clergy Street that I bought with the life insurance and a line of credit from TD that the loan officer had granted me with visible reluctance. I rented both units, paid the mortgage down aggressively, and used the equity to buy a second property, then a third. I brought in a chartered accountant, a sharp woman I had gone to school with who had spent 30 years in commercial real estate before retiring, and together we had structured things carefully, conservatively, and completely out of public view. I did not advertise. I did not talk about money at family dinners. I drove the same Subaru Outback for 11 years. By the time my daughter called me from that bench at Breakwater Park, I owned 14 residential properties in the Kingston area, held minority stakes in 2 commercial buildings, and had a sitting relationship with a corporate lawyer named Margaret, who had once described me, in what I believe she meant as a compliment, as the most organized client she had ever worked with. My son-in-law's father had tolerated my daughter's bloodline. He had no idea whose bloodline he was dealing with. I got the children settled at my house that afternoon's soup, dry clothes, my granddaughter asleep on the couch by 4 o'clock, with the cat tucked under her arm. My grandson sat at the kitchen table and did his homework with the solemn efficiency of a child processing something too big for his vocabulary. I let him be. That evening, after my daughter had bathed and eaten and sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, I asked her to tell me everything. Not the emotional version, the factual version. Dates, names, what was said, what was in writing, what wasn't. She talked for 2 hours. What emerged was a picture I had suspected, but not fully mapped. Over the past 8 months, my son-in-law's father had been systematically repositioning the company's accounts. Freight contracts that had always been handled through the main corporate account had begun moving through a secondary account that my daughter had not previously known existed. She had noticed the discrepancy during a routine reconciliation in November and flagged it internally. 2 weeks later, her access to the accounts receivable system had been removed. The explanation given was a software migration. There had been no software migration. "Did you keep copies?" I asked. She looked at me steadily. "I kept everything," she said. "My daughter is my child." She had a folder on a USB drive. Spreadsheets, email threads, PDF exports of account statements, photographs she had taken on her phone of printed documents she hadn't been able to export. It was not a complete picture, but it was enough of a picture to know that the picture was not clean. I called Margaret at 9 o'clock that night. She did not complain about the hour. She never does. "I need 2 things," I said. "Employment counsel for wrongful dismissal and someone who does corporate fraud. Good people. Not the cheapest." "Give me the morning," she said. The following week moved quickly in the way that weeks do when you have a list, and you work the list methodically. Margaret connected us with an employment lawyer in Toronto, a woman with a reputation for winning cases that looked unwinnable, who reviewed my daughter's situation and used the words constructive dismissal and human rights grounds in the same sentence with a calm that suggested she had done this many times before. Under the Ontario Employment Standards Act and the Human Rights Code, what had been done to my daughter was not a gray area. It was a clear line, crossed deliberately. The corporate file was more complex but ultimately more damaging for my son-in-law's father. The forensic accountant Margaret brought in a quiet man in his 50s who worked from a small office in Ottawa and had spent 12 years with the CRA before going private. Spent 4 days reviewing what my daughter had preserved. He called me on a Thursday morning and said, with the understatement of a man who measures his words, "There is a pattern here that will require explaining." The secondary account had been used to redirect freight billing from 3 major clients. The amounts were not small. Over 18 months, the redirected revenue totaled just under $400,000, running through a numbered company registered in Alberta that traced back through 2 layers to a numbered company registered in my son-in-law's father's name alone. His son, my daughter's husband, was not on any of the paperwork. Whether that meant he was innocent or simply careful, I did not yet know. I want to be honest about what I felt during those weeks. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and sad in the way you feel sad when something you hoped was not true turns out to be exactly as bad as you feared. I thought about my daughter sitting on that bench in the cold with her children and her suitcases. I thought about 23 years of marriage, my own, not hers, the good years and the hard years, and the morning I sat in the parking lot of the KGH for 40 minutes before I could walk in to say goodbye to her father. I know what it means to build a family. I know what it costs when one breaks. But I also know something that my son-in-law's father had apparently failed to understand about women who have been managing things quietly for a very long time. We do not confuse kindness with weakness. The two things have never been the same. Margaret filed the employment claim on a Tuesday. The human rights complaint went in the same day. On Wednesday, the forensic accountant's preliminary report went to a lawyer specializing in corporate fraud, who reviewed it and determined it was sufficient to bring to the RCMP's commercial crime unit. That file was opened on Thursday. I did not tell my daughter's husband any of this was coming. I had thought carefully about whether to warn him. I had sat in my kitchen at 6 a.m. with my coffee and genuinely waited. But the man had stood in a hallway, while his father told his wife that her bloodline was something to be tolerated, and he had said nothing. He had made his calculation. I made mine. The first indication my son-in-law's father had that things were not proceeding, as he had assumed, came in the form of a letter from the employment lawyer, which arrived at the company's registered address on a Friday afternoon. I was told later by the employment lawyer, who had heard it from the process server, that when the letter was opened, the man had read it twice, and then set it down on his desk very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started to shake and you don't want anyone to notice. The following Monday, a second letter arrived. This one was from Margaret, acting on my behalf, regarding a commercial lease my daughter had mentioned in passing during one of our evening conversations, a small detail I had tucked away and looked into quietly. The company's main warehouse in the east end of Kingston was leased on a property I had acquired 2 years earlier as part of a portfolio purchase. The previous owner had never updated the tenant on the ownership change. The lease renewal, which was due in 60 days, would be at market rate. The current market rate was significantly higher than what the company was paying. I want to be clear, I was not doing any of this out of cruelty. I was doing it because my daughter had been told her bloodline was something to be tolerated, and her children had been put out in the cold with suitcases, and I had spent 30 years building something precisely so that I would never be powerless in a situation that required power. There is a difference between revenge and correction. What I was doing was correcting. The two legal files moved forward over the following weeks, with the momentum that well-prepared cases develop when the other side has not prepared at all. The employment matter settled out of court. The opposing counsel, once the human rights component was laid out in full, had apparently advised his client in very direct terms about the likely outcome if the matter went before the tribunal. The settlement figure was not something I will put a number to here, but my daughter received it in full, and she used a portion of it to retain a family lawyer for the separation proceedings, because by then it was clear that her marriage was over and the only question was how to end it without further harm to her children. The corporate fraud matter moved on a different timeline, the way RCMP investigations always do, slowly, thoroughly, without announcement. I was not privy to the details of that investigation. What I know is that my son-in-law's father retained a criminal defense lawyer in March, which I learned from Margaret, who learned it from a contact at the courthouse. What I know is that by April the company's major clients had become aware, through whatever channels these things move through in business communities, that the financial management of the firm was under scrutiny. 2 of the 3 clients whose billing had been redirected had suspended their contracts pending clarification. The company had, as far as I understood it, begun to experience the particular kind of difficulty that comes when trust, which is the only real currency in logistics, has been withdrawn. I did not attend any hearings. I did not make any statements. I continued to drive my Subaru and walk to the market on Saturday mornings and have coffee before the cold drove me home. My daughter moved into one of my rental units, a 2-bedroom on a quiet street in Williamsville, close enough to the school that the children could walk. It needed some work, and we did the work together over 2 weekends in April. New paint in the children's rooms, a better light fixture in the kitchen, a deadbolt on the back door that she picked out herself. She stood in the middle of the living room the first evening after the children were in bed and looked around at the walls and the light and the particular quiet of a space that belonged, for the first time, entirely to her. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I have been asked, by a few people who know pieces of this story, whether I feel sorry for my son-in-law's father, whether I think it went too far, whether there was a way to resolve things more gently. I always think about the word he used, tolerated. He used that word about my daughter, about her children, my grandchildren, who carry both their family lines in their faces and their laughter, and the particular way they furrow their brows when they are thinking hard about something. He built a structure of exclusion around her so gradually and so deliberately that by the time it collapsed, it had her employment, her housing, and 3 years of her life inside it. I did not go looking for a fight. The fight arrived at my door on a Saturday morning in March, with 2 suitcases and a 7-year-old asleep on a bench. What I want to say to anyone listening, anyone who is sitting somewhere right now feeling like the ground has been pulled out from under them, like the people who were supposed to protect them have shown their true face, is this: keep the documents. Keep every email, every text, every record you can lay your hands on. Do not perform strength you do not feel. Do not pretend to be fine when you are not fine, because the pretending will exhaust you when you need that energy for what comes next. Call the person who loves you most and tell them where you are. And know this: the people who look the most powerful in the room are often the people who have never once had to account for what they've done. That moment of accounting is not always loud. It is not always visible, but it comes. My granddaughter started a new school in September. On her first morning, I packed her lunch, a cream cheese bagel, an apple, 2 oatmeal cookies in a small paper bag, and I walked with her to the corner and watched her cross with the crossing guard and disappear through the doors. She had her backpack on straight and her chin up, and she didn't look back. That is her mother in her. That has always been her mother in her. I walked home past the water. The lake in September is a different thing entirely from the lake in March, blue and wide and ordinary and full of light. I bought a coffee at the Tim Hortons on Ontario Street and stood outside for a few minutes without checking my phone or thinking about anything in particular. I thought about her father a little, about how he would have handled all of this. He would have been angrier than me and probably less methodical, which would have made him feel better, faster, and possibly accomplished less. I miss his anger sometimes, the clean, uncomplicated way he had of knowing what was right and saying so. I have always been the slower one, the one who waits and watches and keeps her papers in order. He used to tease me about the files I kept, every document, every receipt, every note from a phone call. "You're going to outlast us all just by being prepared," he used to say. He was not wrong. My daughter called me that evening. After the children were in bed, she asked how my day had been. We talked for 45 minutes about nothing in particular, a show she had started watching, a problem with the bathroom faucet that turned out to be minor, something funny my grandson had said at dinner. At the end of the call, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said simply, "Thank you, Mom." I told her she had done the hard part herself. I meant it. There are things I built over 30 years that I built for myself, for the satisfaction of building them, for the security of knowing that the ground under my feet was ground I had made solid through my own work. I never built any of it imagining a particular use for it. I just built it because that is what I know how to do. And because a woman in this world who builds something quietly and keeps it close has options that a woman who depends on someone else's goodwill does not have. My son-in-law's father learned, eventually, that the woman he had tolerated was the mother of the woman he had attempted to discard. I do not know what he felt when that became clear to him. I have thought about it a few times, not with pleasure exactly, but with the particular satisfaction of a thing that has come full circle. He was a man who had spent 30 years believing that power looked like what he had built, a company with his name on the letterhead, a house in a good neighborhood, a family who deferred to him at dinner. He did not understand that there is another kind of power, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that drives an old Subaru and walks to the market on Saturdays and keeps every document in a file organized by date, the kind that is already in the room before he knows the meeting has started. My grandchildren are doing well. My grandson has joined a hockey team house league, Thursday evenings at the Memorial Center, and has developed strong opinions about goalie equipment that I do not entirely follow but listen to with great attention. My granddaughter has decided she wants to be a veterinarian and has begun reading books about animals with the same focused intensity her mother once brought to freight contracts. They are children. They are resilient and funny and occasionally infuriating and entirely themselves, which is the best thing any child can be. My daughter has gone back to work, not at the family company. She found a position with a mid-sized supply chain firm in Ottawa, good salary, good people, full benefits, and an RRSP matching program that she called me specifically to report with barely contained satisfaction. She takes the train on Monday mornings and comes back Friday evenings, and the children stay with me those nights, which I will not pretend is a hardship. We make pasta. We watch nature documentaries. My granddaughter falls asleep on the couch, and my grandson stays up too late, and I allow both of these things because grandmothers are permitted certain flexibilities that mothers are not. On Friday evenings, when my daughter comes home, I have tea waiting. We sit at the kitchen table and talk the way we talked when she was young and coming home from somewhere and I was here, as I have always been here, waiting with the kettle on and the door unlocked and all the time in the world. Some things I have learned. You cannot protect your children from. You cannot be there for every fall. You cannot prevent every person who means harm from getting close. You cannot stop a man from using the word tolerated about your daughter while she is standing in his hallway. What you can do is be ready. What you can do is build something so quietly and so carefully that when the moment comes, and it always comes, in some form, because that is the nature of life, you have exactly what you need. Not more. Not less. Exactly what the moment requires. I finished my coffee that morning in September, standing on Ontario Street with the lake at my back, and I walked home in the ordinary September light, and I thought about none of this, really, because it was over and my daughter was all right and my grandchildren were in school, and the thing about being 63 years old is that you have learned to let the finished things be finished. I got home, I unlocked the door, I fed the cat, and then I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started reviewing the lease renewal documentation for a property on Division Street. Because the world continues. And so do I, and there is always more work to be done.